I must admit that there probably is some unknown, unknowable aspect in my most non-jazz pieces that is jazz. But Dubrovsky got a starting grant from the National Endowment, and he is up now for a Phase 2 grant. So it might happen, but it is ambitious, I must say. On the other hand, recognize that nowadays a work that has huge production values is in a strange way more commercial, because people want to see in the theater production values that are extensive: lights, dancing, ice skating, big screens, jumping around, huge panoply of stage set. So maybe it was a good idea to do that. As Verdi said, time will tell.
Jazz albums sell roughly as many records as classical music. In your estimation, why has no jazz composer or instrumentalist ever been awarded a Pulitzer Prize for music?
Oh, my dear, the most serious breach there was, of course, Duke Ellington. The advisory board recommended Ellington for a Pulitzer, and he was turned down by people who were in a position to make that decision, which was just a national disgrace. Ellington himself, in his usual offhand manner, said, God didn't want me to be too famous too early. He was already in his late 60s. I'm not so sure. Well, is there... there is some jazz music that's as good as any American classical music, and certainly Ellington would be the highest in that category, and it should have been. It should have happened. Why didn't it happen? I don't know. It's that maybe, again, our insecurity or our feeling that that which is classical or that which is connected with the elite or the rich is more important than that which is true to us and part of us.
Do you believe in France he would have had the recognition he deserved?
He probably got it there. Well, France is not heaven, though. I mean, I've worked in France, but there's a certain curiosity that's somewhat beneficial to oddballs or mavericks or unusual things that we see, including Jerry Lewis.
Is it an indictment of our society that we are so slow to pick up on people who are wonderful composers in our midst while they're still living? What does it say about the American people?
It's hard to recognize talent. It's hard to see what's good. It's much easier to see what is not working. And that's part of it. The other part of it is that we probably should encourage diversity. I mean, Jesse talked about censorship ad infinitum, but is he really interested in raising the level of American children? If he is, why isn't there an orchestra for children? Why isn't there more contribution of the society to the arts? So that's the larger issue. The issue, in my mind, the issue of recognition is complicated. We're given a chance to and that way, nicer, less warlike.
For a formidable teacher yourself, how do you feel about teaching in general?
I've always loved teaching, and I started out teaching privately. And then when I moved into classroom teaching, I more or less followed the examples of my teachers at Roosevelt College, and I taught the students what I knew. And in the last 10 years or so, however, I've decided I've really come to understand teaching, really come to love teaching, especially teaching classes. And I think I've learned how to be more metaphorical, more interesting, engage the attention of the student without debasing anything that I have in mind. And I think I've learned to work harder at teaching in preparation for the teaching than I ever did before. The most interesting thing for me is to learn how to teach. Socratically is the wrong word, but we'll have to do that, is to teach in relationship to the students who are there in the class, how to respond to them and how to guide that conversation toward a given position. I used to be afraid of that. I used to want more frequently to tell them things rather than to elicit them from the students themselves.
If you were not a composer, teacher, and writer, what would you choose to be?
I'm really trying to to round off my life's work as a teacher and as a composer. And I suppose my biggest ambition is to start a preparatory program at Columbia College so that we can teach people from age 2 to 18 how to play instruments, how to sing, about music. Not so much so that they will be students of Columbia College or they will even go into music at all, but so they will have the gift of music, which is so startlingly kept from them at this point in our history.
Is there something left unfinished that you might do as a composer for all your fans? Something you haven't tried? Something you're going to be working on?
Well, in a way, Joanne, every position you do is the same song, and you're trying to get it right. So in that sense, I'm still trying to get it right. And I suppose it'll be more opera or theater music, and I think I will compose a large religious work of some sort. And I have regrets about never having finished a big piece, a Baha'i piece for Dizzy Gillespie. It was left unfinished. And another piece for Ellington and his orchestra in the San Francisco Symphony.
Where in Chicago can you have your works performed? What kind of theaters do we have here?
Well, the Lyric has seriously been considering Dubrovsky for a couple of years. These things are very slow. I mean, for example, I recorded a piece in London in 1983, and it issued only recently, in November of 1990. There's a time, there's a lag on those things. I do write things from time to time for students and professionals at the college. Chicago Symphony has played The Golden Bird, which is a piece for children, on 2 occasions, and is going to play it again this spring.
Do you regret that more filmmakers like Spielberg or Rob Reiner, to name a couple, do not commission more composers to write original film scores?
Film writing is very tough these days, especially because the budget is so enormous that the director has to be sure that the music is going to be absolutely right. And if it's absolutely right, it's not going to be great, but it's going to serve its purposes. There's no chance for failure. There's no chance even for the failure that Bernstein had with on the Waterfront. So film writing is too tightly regulated to be of a great deal of interest to me, except perhaps composing music for animated films with somebody like John and Faith Hubley. I've written a lot of work with Faith Hubley over the last 15 years, and I would unhesitatingly do more work for her, partly because I've learned so much from her.
Your music is very demanding. How do you feel when the music you wrote is performed poorly?
I don't worry about it as much as I used to. I used to think that only I could conduct a performance of my music properly, and then I came to realize that I felt that because I was doing it. It's just like one is unworried driving a car, but tends to be worried about somebody who is driving the car other than oneself, who's driving exactly in the same way. I don't think I worry about it as much. And a piece of mine was performed just this week, and I thought it was done beautifully. I think one calms down. Also, I think that one writes in more expected ways, or things that I did when I was young that nobody knew how to do, now they know how to do. So they're more likely to come up with a correct or interesting or viable performance of the piece.
If you were not a composer, a teacher, writer, what would you choose to be?
I think I would teach elementary school.
A teacher?
Mm-hmm.
You start a where you're going to be interested in bringing out the best in people, right? So.
I think so. I worry about elementary school education, not the teachers, the whole procedure of it, and I think if I had to do it over again, I might very well consider teaching young people and composing. I don't know how so. I am thinking it out.
Our society recognizes several heroes, movie stars, athletes. Artists, composers, and musicians are much slower to get acclaim. Yet recently, you received a Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award from the Chicago chapter of the National Academy of Recording Arts and Sciences. Why did it take Chicago so long to reward one of its own?
I think Chicago has rewarded me a lot over the years. Chicago is a notoriously tough town, but I think it's been very kind to me, especially during the last 15 or 20 years. The hardest thing about being here is that people often ask, why are you here if you're so good? Which is unanswerable. There's a question like, are you still beating your wife? I'm not so sure that being on everybody's, on the tip of everybody's tongue or being known everywhere is so important. It worries me a little bit. I mean, the money, what more could money bring? I saw a cape that I liked. I can't think of anything that I really want that money can buy. Fame, I think, produces great anxiety. I'm not so sure I would want to deal with some of the things that famous friends of mine, Bernstein, Ozawa, Mort Saul, to name three, have had to deal with. I don't think that's particularly a desirable aim in life, and what I try to tell my students is maybe they shouldn't go for power and money and fame, because the reward might not be as great as they think.
How then do you measure success?
By leading a good life, the good life. Plato says that we don't mourn the life of a good person, and I think there's truth in that. If a person has really done everything that he or she could have done or should have done, or most of what we could have done, then not much more could be asked from life than that.
How do you want to be remembered?
As somebody who tried